Hello, my name is Ingrid. I'm a ranger with the National Park Service, and I've got to say, we are so glad you're here. I am coming to you from an area known as Bartlett Cove, which is down near the mouth of Glacier Bay, the place that has forests. And it's actually raining a little bit right now. Maybe it's raining where you are too. But I have a story to share with you. It's based on a story that was written by a great naturalist, a man by the name of John Muir. And he wrote this story after a certain experience he had here in Glacier Bay. And his story goes like this. The year was 1880, and John Muir was in Fort Wrangell. He was getting ready to explore the icy regions of southeast Alaska. The canoes were packed, all the provisions stowed. The Tlingit men, who were to be his paddlers, they were in the ready. He was awaiting his traveling companion, a man by the name of the Reverend Samuel Hall Young. Now, when Reverend Young arrived, he brought with him a small black dog, and this dog proceeded to jump down in the canoe and curl up among the provisions. Now, John Muir liked dogs, but this dog was so small and so seemingly worthless that he objected to him coming along, to which Reverend Young said, no, he was a perfect wonder of a dog. He could endure cold and hardship like a bear. He could swim like a seal. He had wondrous wit and cunning. He listed off so many virtues, it made it seem like this dog was going to be the most interesting member of the party. Now, the dog's name was Stickeen, and he'd been given that name by the Stickeen Indians of Fort Wrangell, who had adopted him as kind of a totem. No one could hope to unravel his ancestry, because he was short-legged, he was bunched-bodied, his hair was long and dark and silky, it had a slight wave, and at first glance, his most noticeable feature was his tail, which arched up over his back and almost touched his nose. Now, over the course of the trip, Stickeen would prove to be an interesting study. He approached danger and hardship without anything like reason. Ordinary storms were a pleasure to him, and as for mere rain, well, he flourished in it like a vegetable. He never took an order, always insisted on having his own way, but never complained. And unlike most dogs, Stickeen did not seem to want or live for pets and affection. He seemed emotionless, unflappable. It was with this dog that John Muir would have what he described as his most memorable wild day. It happened when the two of them were out exploring the surface of a glacier together. They were many, many miles from camp. And then the weather changed, and the ceiling came down, and it began to snow. Now, they had very few supplies, just a little bit of bread to eat. And the only piece of equipment he had was an ice axe. So the two of them, when the weather changed, they began to make their way back across the surface of that glacier, back toward camp. And to do so, they had to work their way among many deep fissures in the ice. These are called crevasses. And there were several times where John Muir had to jump over crevasses, knowing that if he had to retrace his steps, there was no way he could jump back. And so it was, they found themselves stranded on a narrow ice island. And their only hope lay in a sliver bridge that was from one side of the crevasse to the other. Now, this crevasse was about 50 feet wide and maybe 100 feet deep, maybe more. But this sliver bridge of ice went across it diagonally, so it was about 70 feet in length. It attached to the side of the crevasse about 8 feet down from the surface of the glacier, and there was a deep sag in the middle of another 20 feet. John Muir would later write that In all his wild wanderings, he never saw anything as plain and stern and merciless as this. But they had to try. So he knelt down, and with that ice axe, he began to chip away at the surface of the glacier, eventually creating steps that led down to that sliver bridge. And when he got to that sliver bridge of ice, he sat astride with one long leg on each side. And he used that ice axe to chip away at the ridge, so he created a platform that was maybe 5 to 8 inches wide. And he would scooch forward, chip away, scooch forward, chip away, scooch forward, chip away, scooch forward. So it was. He inched his way across that sliver bridge. And when he got to the far side, he carved handholds and footholds that allowed him to climb back up to the surface of the glacier. Safe. But oh, poor Stickeen. When John Muir first knelt down, Stickeen came and thrust his head past John Muir's shoulder. He looked down in the crevasse. He looked at the sliver bridge. And then he looked at John Muir with this look of concern in his eyes. He began to mutter and whine, speaking as clearly as if using words. "Surely, you are not going down into that awful place." Now, John Muir had never seen this dog indicate that it knew that there was any such thing as danger, that it even knew that ice was slippery. But here in his looks and his tone of voice, it was so human that John Muir began to speak to the dog as if he were a boy who needed comforting. And perhaps in trying to comfort the dog's fears, John Muir was trying to comfort his own. He said, "Hush your fears, my boy. We will get across safe, but it will not be easy. No right way is easy in this rough world. We must risk our lives to save them." Stickeen began to cry, and he ran off in this kind of desperate excitement, seeking some other way across the crevasse. And from time to time, as John Muir was inching his way across that sliver bridge, Stickeen came to the edge of the crevasse, and he barked and he whined. And when John Muir got to the far side, he called back to Stickeen to come on, it's not that bad. Stickeen would come to the edge of the crevasse. He would look down, and then he would sit back, throw back his head, and howl out his conviction as if to say, "I will never, never, never go that way." His composure vanished utterly. So hidden before, Stickeen was now transparent. You could see the working of his heart and his mind like a watch removed from its case. And his looks, his tones of voice, his hopes and fears, they were so perfectly human, but none could mistake them. And at last, with the courage that comes from despair, Stickeen came to the edge of the crevasse and looked down. "Hush your fears, my boy." Stickeen pressed his small body on the ice, as though he were trying to take advantage of every bit of friction his hair could create. And then he slid his 2 little front legs forward and down to the first step. And when they were on that first step, he pulled his back legs forward and down to the first step. And when he was there, he kept his balance. He was so bunched up, it looked like he was standing on his head. But he held his own, and he slid his front legs down to the next step, and the next step, and the next. And at last he made that sliver bridge. And then he did not pause. He braced his small body against the gusting wind, and he took steady, measured steps across that sliver bridge. And when he got to the far side, he sat down. John Muir called to the dog. He leaned over as far as he dared, ready to grab that dog if he got within distance. But Stickeen was just sitting there. He was looking up at the footholds and the handholds, as if fixing each one in his mind. And then with a spring, he shot up. He hit those holes, just boom, 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 shot past John Muir's shoulder onto the surface of the glacier, safe. And then came a scene. Little Stickeen just darting hither and thither as if fairly demented, running around in great giddy loops and circles like a leaf that was caught in a whirlwind. He would stop. Then he would roll over and over, and he would suddenly stop and then kick his rear legs up over his head, all the while pouring forth this tumultuous flood of cries and gasps and mutterings. Never before or after would John Muir see such an outpouring of passionate, triumphant, uncontrollable joy. But they had miles to go. So at last he called to Stickeen to come on, and the two of them ran across the surface of the glacier towards camp, and they did not encounter another terrible crevasse, for surely heaven would count one enough for a lifetime. After that, Stickeen was a changed dog. He followed John Muir everywhere, tried to keep him ever in sight. And sometimes at night, when they were sitting around the campfire, Stickeen would come and rest his head on John Muir's knee. And when he caught his eye, he seemed to be trying to say, "Wasn't that an awful time we had together on the glacier?" John Muir would later write that in the course of his life, he had many dog friends, and much he could write of their wisdom and devotion. But to none did he owe as much as to Stickeen. For in their storm battle for life, Stickeen had come to light, and it was through him, as through a window, John Muir was able to gaze with greater sympathy into all his fellow mortals. That is Stickeen by John Muir. Thanks so much for listening. I hope you have a wonderful time in Glacier Bay.